Where did I put my little thingamajiggy? Oh, here it is. So anyway, I had just finished carving this little pendant out of whale's tooth, and I'm going to mount it in silver. We've had some interest in how I do the silver work. Mine may be a little bit unorthodox. I'll show you one way to do it. Start off with, I need a bezel, okay? So this is going to have a backing of silver and a bezel that will go around, wrap around the piece and then be formed around it to hold the ivory in place. And then I'll put a little jump ring on top of it so that you can hang it on a chain or something. What I'll do is one of these little devices here. I think this one, kind of get a fix on how wide my bezel wants to be. And I got some really nice silver sheet here, and this will be way too thin to use for backing, but perfect. I got it to make bezel out of anyway, and I've been making bezel out of it. The edge is a little wavy right now, so using a rawhide mallet so it doesn't mark the silver, but it'll straighten it out. And then, because I've already taken bezel off the edge of this, it's got a sharp edge. I'm going to use some fine sandpaper to just kind of soften that up a little bit. It really doesn't take much. Silver is so soft. Use a coarser paper and make sure that this is good and flat. If I use shears, it really buggers the edge, and it's hard to follow a straight line. So a bunch of years ago, I made this little device, and it's a little piece of ivory with a set screw in it and a little slide gauge here that hooks over, and it's got a sharp edge on that hook. So I can set it, lay it over the board here, and so it's got something to press against, and I use this to. So I'm just scoring a line. It's actually cutting a line into the silver. Do it on both sides. Let's see if I've done it enough yet. Not quite. So I have the line now right on the edge of the board. You can see it bends over, breaks kind of on that score mark. You can buy bezel. Already cut. Pre-cut. Pre-cut. But I figured it's more diverse. I can make the bezel as wide as I want to. And so basically I cut a piece of paper, because paper's cheaper than silver. I wrap it around a piece like that, usually good and awkward. Take a little sharp knife and mark where the end is, because it's a finer line than a pencil would make. So there. Now I will double check just to make sure it comes together right nice. It does. So then I lay it upon the bezel. Cut it right on the line. Hard part's done. Not really. It's coming. Initially I sanded that first edge, so that's good, but the fresh edge, so you bring it around, you don't have to make it fit the piece yet. All you got to do is bring it around so that the two ends are touching, which with this thin stuff is kind of a trick. Basically on this particular piece, there'll be 3 phases. You solder the bezel together, then you got to solder the bezel to the backing, and then you have to solder the jump ring device, however you want to do that, onto it all. So I have 3 grades of solder. There's hard, which melts at a higher temperature, and there's medium, which is a little lower temperature, and then there's easy, which is the lowest temperature. So you start with the hardest one, and then when you solder the next phase on, you solder it to the backing, you use the medium and the hard.
Oh, so you don't undo what you've done.
Right. Exactly. Somebody figured that out a long time ago. Most important thing when you're soldering silver is to make sure that the edges are clean, oil-free, and all of that. And you have oil in your fingers, so you don't want to touch the areas that you're going to solder and you want to try to clean them up a little bit, either with like this with some sandpaper, delicate little operation, or file. So over here is my little soldering station. This is fire bricks because I love my shop.
So you like it even more than the one you had before you got the...
We're not talking about that. I don't have like high-tech nucleonic planet buster kind of torches and stuff. I went down to the hardware store and, well, this one's a Burns-O-Matic, and this has a big flame. With silver, you want to flood the whole piece that you're doing for the solder to flow properly. And for the bigger pieces, this is a good torch to use. It's a propane. It runs off of one of these little bottles, just like this one. This one is a little more delicate and very handy. They're under $100, like $75 or something like that, and that's.
You just got that at the hardware store, right?
I did. Both of these I got. Yeah. They work just fine. In here is the pickle, and it's a type of acid that is diluted in water. After you solder, you put your silver in that, and it cleans all the flux. You buy it as a powder, and you mix it with water. And most of my silver supplies I get at Rio Grande, and this is what it's called, Rio Pickle. And yeah, I don't see any other fancier names than that. So that's that. I have my handy flux, which is also comes in a powder form, and you add a bit of water to that to get it to the consistency that you can use. This is the flux. I've added water to it earlier because I left the top off of it and it went dry. And I don't know what this thing was once upon a time, but it makes a really cool container for my flux because it's like a mortar. See this piece of bone here? If I put the dry flux in here and add a little bit of water, I can use the bone like a pestle in a mortar. Make sure that's good and mixed up. Everything looks well. Take the flux and I put it on the ends I want to solder. You just want to make sure it's on it. And the flux keeps impurities out and cleans the area that's going to be soldered. And then I got to put the two ends together so that they stay long enough for me to do something. That'll work, I think. All right, so I set that. I'll leave it over the edge to keep it clean. And then up here I have my different grades of solder. This is, again, Rio Grande hard wire solder. And I always take sandpaper fine, like 320 or something like that. Clean it off. And this is where I cut my solder. Make sure there's nothing on it but solder. And I generally cut a couple pieces just because. So I take the littlest piece I can find, put it on a high spot on that. Right? It's even able to find the piece of solder. So right now I have the two ends butted up against each other as squarely as I can get them, and the crack of it is setting right on top of that little piece of solder. So what I'm going to do is start heating it up, and then once it reaches that critical temperature where that solder will flow, theoretically, it'll jump up the crack. That's the plan. So you start it slow. You don't want the heat to make it distort. The hard part for me about this, using this hard solder, is that it flows just almost the same time the silver wants to melt. I think it went. Usually I see it jump, but I didn't see it jump, but I did see evidence that it flowed, so. In the worst case scenario, you have to solder it again, but it's not that bad, not as bad as melting. So I leave it in there for just 30 seconds or a minute. This acid, you can't put any iron, steel, or anything like that in it, or it'll ruin the batch. So I made a pair of tweezers, or you could buy a pair of tweezers out of copper. Dig it out with that, and then I rinse it off in clear water, and then set it on a paper towel. Now we'll see if fairy tales do come true. It did it.
You kind of pulled out that.
Yeah, just to
test it.
Make sure. I could see, when it was hot, I could see the little puddle of solder went up. Oh, rats. Now we're going back to the drawing board, I'm afraid.
Uh-oh.
We have to... It's a little too big. So, and that happens. That happens.
How not to make a bezel?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's not as easy as it looks, gotta say.
You cutting it right where the thing was, or somewhere else?
I'm cutting it right at the joint, because I only want one solder joint. And I cut just a little bit out of it. I cut this a little bit bigger than the piece. Try not to overcut in the corners. Follows it up for later. So there. So I've cut it out, cut the backing out, and I left it wider than the bezel. And now I've got it all marked out with a pencil. And I'm going to file little lobes all the way around, like little petals. By using this little square jeweler's file, I went around and I notched each one of the marks that I had made with the pencil. So now I'm going to go back around with this file, which has a flat cutting surface. I can get right in here. As I'm filing around, this edge won't bugger up the lobe next to it. There, see now? Nice little Here it is all done and cleaned up. I've softened the edges with some steel wool. Next phase, I've got a piece of 20 gauge silver wire here that I've annealed, made it soft. I'm going to put that in here like this. Nice and tight. Find the middle. And I've got an egg beater drill. And I've taken a piece of wire and made a little hooky dooky. And you put that in there. It up good and tight because it will back off a little bit. That looks pretty good. We've got a little silver rope. I'm going to clean that up with some steel wool real quick so it shines for you. First I'm going to trim this end off. Use a piece of rawhide, fold it over, makes a nice clamp pad. Flatten it out while I'm holding it. Now we're going to basically do the same process as what we did with the bezel. So I'm going to fit it around this. It's going to look oh so nice. The trick is always holding it. Looks pretty good. I soldered the ends together and put it in the pickle and then cleaned it up with some steel wool and got it all ready to go. So now we'll see if it fits on the pendant. There it is. I like the rope with nautical stuff, you know, lobster lines and so forth. I'm going to solder this on first, you know, tack it in with some easy, soft silver solder. All right, so I've got the rope border all fastened on there, good and secure. Now it's time to make a hanger to suspend it by. This is 320 sandpaper, pretty fine, but it's coarse enough to take off file marks. I don't want to put more lines in it to get out. Worst part about doing this, sanding this piece of wire, is the possibility of sticking it in your finger. You're not paying attention. This is 4/0 steel wool. Well, that looks good enough. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into with that. So I'm going to turn this into a little curlicue. And I'm going just below that curlicue with one of the jaws. Yeah. And I got a nice big flat area here to solder it on, going like that. Okay, so this is it with the hanger securely fastened to the back, and I've steel wooled it down to the point where now I'm going to polish it. I have big wheels, but these little ones on a handpiece are nice for doing small stuff. Less chance it's going to grab it and throw it across the room. I put a little polishing compound on it. It's just polishing or buffing wheel. The polishing compound is just very, 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 very fine grit. The wheel is good because it takes out, it gets hot, and it really is a little more aggressive than doing it by hand. It takes out some of the finer scratches and so forth. Then I have a piece of deer skin that I rub the same polishing compound on. Okie dokie, Smokey, we get her all nice and shiny. And lobsters in there. Tighten this bezel up. I have made a little special drift punch for that. So I'm going to pinch it around the perimeter, different places, and then go around and do the whole thing. Here it is all put together, and really appreciate you joining us on this project. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next reel.